I'm Roberta. And as far back as I can remember, I worked in my family's dinnerware business. From sophisticated dinner plates to the basic cups you grab first thing in the morning. We have it all. This is a real family business. The day everything started to change felt like any other. But for Mrs. Wilson's sudden appearance from the bakery next door. She had a way of barging in and taking charge like she owned the place. She yelled, "John!" as soon as she stepped inside our store. "I need a word with you. Pronto." The sound of her voice pierced the concrete. I broke off from organizing the freshly delivered ceramic teapots to watch the drama develop. Dad gave me an angry look as he wiped his hands on his apron, saying, "Here we go again." "Of course. Beverly. What are your thoughts?" Even though Dad generally tried to keep things positive around her, you could tell he was nervous. Mrs. Wilson looked around the room and then at me. "Roberta. This is a family issue. Would you perhaps grant us a little privacy?" I was annoyed by her tone, but I ignored it and strolled to the other side of the shop, pretending to make some tweaks to a perfectly arranged display of dinner sets. I wasn't listening in on purpose, but their discussion was audible over the bookcases. "John. Let's go right to the subject. Forever neighbors are our bakery and your store. It's time to think bigger picture. How do you feel about combining our operations?" Her voice became serious and businesslike. Dad gave a small, unexpected cough. "You speak of a merger, Beverly. That is quite the proposition. What spurred this unexpected thought?" "Not only that," she said in a hushed tone that made me struggle to hear, "but I think our kids could really cement this arrangement. It would be official if Roberta and Lucas tied the knot." I almost let a teacup fall. Even though he was 10 years older than me, Lucas was the same Lucas who was her son. Even though we lived close by, we hardly spoke to one another more than a few words. I glanced along the aisle and saw my father scratching his head with a frown of concentration. "At last," he said. "Lucas is a lovely young guy. And Roberta's a brilliant girl. But marriage, Beverly. They hardly know one another." He said, "Trust me. They'll get along," in a tone that alluded to Mrs. Wilson's customary assertiveness. "Besides, it does seem like a prudent business move, doesn't it?" She spoke with an air of confidence and authority, as if she were accustomed to getting her way. Grandpa nodded slowly. "I'll discuss it with Miss and Roberta." "Of course." Dad motioned for me to come after Mrs. Wilson when she left. "Roberta. You heard all that, didn't you?" Uncertain of how to make sense of it all, I simply nodded. "She wants to merge the store and the bakery. And she wants me to marry Lucas." "Yeah," Dad said, massaging his temples. "What do you think?" There was a lot to process. It sounded like a scenario from an old movie. And it was definitely not what I had envisaged for myself to marry for business. "Dad. I'm not sure. Although Lucas looks like a nice guy. Marrying him like that. I propose that we have a formal meeting this time so that we can see if we click. There's no rush to make a decision now. We'll approach this cautiously at first." Lucas and I spent the ensuing months getting to know one another. I found that he was not only courteous, but that, unlike his mother, he actually had a genuine enthusiasm for the company. Our conversations frequently drifted from work to personal issues, which made our arrangement less transactional and more like a possible partnership. But organizing the wedding presented a whole new set of difficulties. My soon-to-be mother-in-law, Mrs. Wilson, took charge and planned the entire event, including the cake, which she got from her bakery, and the decorations, which were taken directly from her window displays. She stormed into the room one afternoon as we were going over the guest list, carrying a massive stack of invitations, as if she had called the entire town. She spoke important. "Roberta, dear, I've added a few names to your guest list, people crucial to our business," she said. "There they are." And with a loud thud that shocked me, she dropped the stack on the table. In an attempt to avoid conflict, I bit my tongue. Lucas saw me and gave me a soft squeeze under the table. "Robbie, we'll work things out. Recall that today is our day," he said. The day of the wedding flew by. I didn't feel like a bride standing at the rear of the hall in my dress. Instead, I felt like a pawn in Mrs. Wilson's elaborate business plan. My father came over, his grin a little forced. "You appear stunning, Roberta. Are you prepared?" he questioned, extending his arm. I took a big breath and nodded. "Let's do this." The ceremony went fairly quickly, and then Lucas and I were officially declared husband and wife. The guests of Mrs. Wilson seemed more interested in the prospects of our combined businesses than our union, and the reception was boisterous. The merger, which combined both stores into one sizable area with a bakery and a tableware section, was completed shortly after the wedding. Mrs. Wilson was everywhere on the combined store's first day of business, commanding the employees like a general. She screamed out across the store, "Roberta, dear, make sure those plates line up perfectly with the symmetry of the pastries." I tried to live up to her high expectations when I rearranged the plates. Lucas was coordinating with the bakers in the bakery sector in the meantime, trying to match his mother's stress on symmetry. He screamed over the din, "Make sure those scones are fresh, Roberta." The burden only increased as the weeks stretched into months. I was unable to attend my college courses since I was handling paperwork, helping in the bakery, and balancing the front of the business. "Roberta, you are now operating a business. Your degree won't be necessary." One evening, Mrs. Wilson said in a flippant tone that suggested the issue was already resolved, "This is your life." I was surprised by how strongly her remarks affected me. Living with them was meant to reduce costs and streamline operations. But in the end, it made me work more hours, because of our house's closeness to the business, lack of privacy, and Mrs. Wilson's continual supervision. I felt claustrophobic. What had felt like a collaboration turned into a hostile takeover. Amidst all of this, I was more troubled by my father's growing absence than I had anticipated. I could feel his absence one very busy Tuesday morning as I set up the store before it opened. When the day first started, he used to be here by now, sharing a few laughs. Rather It was simply the sound of clinking ceramics and me. That evening, I went to see my parents following a demanding day of attending to clients and complying with Mrs. Wilson's constant orders. Their living room had a very weighted air about it. Like unspoken things that no one was brave enough to say. Dad. Why aren't you at the store much anymore? As soon as I took a seat, I asked directly. It seemed vital to take a straightforward approach. My dad raised his head, a scowl appearing on his forehead. Well, Roberta, things are not so simple, he acknowledged. Beverly has taken over more than we anticipated. With a hint of worry in her voice, my mother spoke out. Roberta. She's driven your father away. It was more than just a merger when we signed the contract. It appears as though we gave her the kingdom's keys. My stomach contorted into a ball. Dad. What do you mean? I objected. Saying you've always managed the vendors and the orders. With his hands clenched together, he let out a groan. Not at this time. Beverly revised the job descriptions. I'm scarcely a consultant anymore. Legally speaking, I have no control over the company I founded. I felt a sudden, intense, burning wave of anger. Why didn't you say anything? I insisted. My mother said, her eyes saddening. We thought we could handle it. Sort it out without worrying you. But we obviously can't. Roberta. She's stealing everything we've worked for. I confronted Mrs. Wilson the following day. It was early. Just as the store was starting to get illuminated by the morning light. When I walked in, she was setting up pastries with her back to me. Mrs. Wilson. Let's talk about my dad. I said, sounding firmer than I meant to. She turned around and pretended to be surprised. Oh. What about him? Dear. You are aware of what I am discussing. He's being forced out of his own company by you. What is the purpose of your actions? I insisted. Mrs. Wilson stood up straight and turned to face me, wiping her hands on her apron. Your father is becoming older. Roberta. The pressure of the business is too much for him. This works well for everyone. I'm increasing productivity. That's not your call to make. I fired back, fury erupting in me. He constructed this location. You cannot simply ignore him because you believe it will be better. She shook her head and scoffed. Business is tough. Roberta. The importance comes from the need to maintain the business's viability, not from emotion. We felt as though the earth had been lifted from under us when the pandemic struck. The store's sales were falling off every day, and the empty aisles were a constant reminder of how vulnerable we were. During one of these uncomfortable transitions, I came to the realization that we couldn't afford to just wait for things to get back to normal. Lucas. We have to change. I said. We cannot afford to stay in the same place. Let's move to an online platform. Investigate delivery choices. And accommodate customized orders. Lucas seemed skeptical, but he gave it a shot anyway. Let's talk to Mom about it. But convincing Mrs. Wilson turned out to be a difficult undertaking. She was adamant about her methods and thought selling things online was dangerous. As expected, She completely rejected the topic when we brought it up to her. We're not just some tech startup, she asserted. We operate as a conventional brick and mortar company. We can endure this storm. Even though she refused, I could no longer watch helplessly as our company was about to fail. So I launched a clandestine operation after hours, using the store's assets to create an internet presence. After the bakery closed, I even dabbled in cake baking while tactfully selling our goods. Orders started coming in slowly, then exploded. It was quite tiring to keep this venture a secret from Mrs. Wilson and Lucas as well. I balanced my day job at the store with our covert online transactions, coming home frequently after midnight. One evening, when I tried to slip inside the house in silence, Mrs. Wilson met me in the dark living room, her face displaying a mix of disappointment and rage. She asked harshly, "Where have you been, Roberta? Look at the state of this house." "I've been working," I said, to support myself. "We received a sudden influx of online orders tonight." I tried to explain, but my voice trembled. Tired from too many late nights. Orders online. Which orders are made online? Before I could say anything more, Mrs. Wilson's voice rose sharply in an angry tone. Abruptly, lured by the growing din, Lucas came down the steps. He turned to face his mother and asked, "Mom, what's going on? Ask your spouse about the situation." Mrs. Wilson shot back at me. "She's ignoring her responsibilities here and running some secretive side business." Lucas turned to look at me, looking for an explanation, his face painted with confusion and frustration, with a hint of frustration in his voice. He questioned, "What's she talking about?" With a heavy sigh, realizing that the last several weeks had finally worn me out, I admitted, "I opened an internet business. Ever since the pandemic started, it has been keeping us afloat. I didn't tell you because I didn't think your mother would approve, and since she said no." Lucas rubbed his temples and looked from his mother to me as the realization dawned on him. He berated Roberta, seeming disappointed. "You should have told me, Roberta," he said. "And you ought to have been more receptive to her ideas," he said, turning to face his mother. Mrs. Wilson's face became stern. "This is my house, and while you're under my roof, you'll follow my rules. Both of you." From then, the conversation got more heated, with Lucas, who is normally one of my allies, speaking out for his mother. Reluctantly, I reduced the number of online purchases since I was defeated and hurt that Lucas didn't see my efforts to save our company. Rather than baking or preparing shipments, I spent my mornings cleaning. Working behind the pastry counter in the afternoons served as a sobering reminder of the sacrifices I had to make to keep the harmony in the home. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, staggered into the store as I was cleaning up the corridor on a gloomy, rainy afternoon. Tears marred her face, and her garments clung to her flesh. Wet. I quickly put down the plate stack and ran to her, my face full of worry. The little child seemed distressed, and I observed it when I organized stuff. "Hi there. What took place? Are you all right?" I asked, trying to sound as nice as possible. Mrs. Wilson saw us from the end of the aisle and marched over before she could reply. Her lips squeezed into a narrow line. What is this? There's not enough time for this today. She appears to be indigent. Before others see. Get her outside. She gave the order. My gut twisted at what she said. Mrs. Wilson. She's just a kid. I objected. She's obviously lost and needs help. Lucas came over. Hearing what his mother was saying. He looked at the girl. Then back at me. His expression unreadable. Mother is correct. Roberta. Children like her rushing into the store is not acceptable. It is detrimental to business. Please just handle it. He asked. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. Lucas. She feels alone and afraid. I persisted. We can't just throw her back out into the rain. But it didn't seem to register. Disregarding their protests. I escorted the girl to a chair close by and covered her with a fresh blanket from the laundry area. In an attempt to console her, I heated up some hot chocolate for her. Mom Wilson was enraged. Roberta. This is just the kind of diversion we need not have. Any consequences from this are your responsibility. She reprimanded. Sophie. The girl. Finally became calm enough to tell me her story. She got lost after straying from a local park. The cops showed up right as she was beginning to unwind. They told me that Sophie's parents had been seeking for her and thanked me for taking care of her. As it happens, she wasn't really that far from home. Mrs. Wilson grabbed me aside. Her look hard and harsh after the police and Sophie gone. I'm docking your pay for that little stunt of yours. You took a break from your job to address this issue. You're going to make up for it by washing dishes for the next 2 days. She commanded. Lucas never once defended me. Instead nodding in agreement with his mother's choice. It hurt more than I had anticipated. I was feeling more like a servant than a member of the family that night when I washed pot after pot. Although Lucas had always been there for me, he now felt like an extra weight. With every critical comment from Mrs. Wilson and every nod of agreement from him acting as a painful reminder of my captivity. One average morning at the business was interrupted by the entrance of a well-dressed man who seemed to be searching for something unusual. I greeted him warmly and asked if he wanted help. He nodded and said he was looking for a fancy tea set. Leading him through our best selection. He seemed impressed and ultimately chose one of our more ornate sets. When I meticulously wrapped his order, he browsed our assortment of pastries and chose several sweets. His manner stayed friendly the entire time, striking up light conversation and expressing interest in the background of the store. He said thank you when I rang up his purchases, then became more serious. By the way, he said, I'm not sure if you recall, but my daughter was the little girl you assisted last week during the storm. I was taken aback by his confession, but I comforted him by remembering her courage. Grinning broadly, he gave me his business card. I sincerely appreciate your assistance. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you ever need help or advice. Looking over the card, I saw that Mr. Hayes was a lawyer. This caught my attention, especially considering the difficulties the store is currently undergoing and the upcoming merger. Actually, I thought, there might be a legal matter we could discuss, concerning the business my late father owned with my mother-in-law. Encouraged. He proposed a meeting to discuss the specifics the following week in his office. I took him up on his offer with mixed feelings of relief and caution. I turned over the stack of papers my father had signed years prior in his office. The ones that combined our family business with my mother-in-law's bakery. He studied them carefully, his brow deepening with every page. There was a long pause before Mr. Hayes spoke. There are a number of serious problems here, he said solemnly. The contract has various infractions that are really concerning. If you're willing to argue against this, I think we have a compelling argument. He kindly promised to help out pro gratis to make things right. Though overwhelmed, I was able to convey my appreciation. Thank you so much. It's simply, challenging. It also includes my husband's family, I said, struggling to control my mixed feelings. He gave a sympathetic nod. It concerns your life more than just business. Remember that you're not fighting this battle alone. And you deserve to take back control of that. I was both nervous and full of hope when I left his office. Could I really oppose my partner and his mother? But it was also terrifying to consider the alternative of living under Mrs. Wilson's tyrannical control and witnessing the mishandling of my parents' inheritance. I was shocked to see what was waiting for me when I got home that evening. Still in shock from my appointment with the lawyer. There was a flurry of activity throughout the house as people laughed and spoke and clinked glasses in joy. Slightly inebriated. My mother-in-law noticed me. She yelled across the room. There you are. Wandering the streets when you should be here serving your guests. Roberta. It's your anniversary. Do you not feel obligated? Taken aback. I stumbled through an apology. My inattention adding to the tension in the room. However, my comments had little effect on her rage. She threw a nearby pizza box at me out of anger. And it grazed my shoulder before smashing into the floor. Her face flushed with rage. She spat. Absolutely useless. Before I could gather myself again, Lucas staggered over. Obviously drunk. You don't even appear to be hungry. He slurred and mockingly sprayed wine on my hands and clothes, saying, Wash up. For heaven's sake. The chilly wine crept into my shirt. A tangible representation of the disdain and shame I experienced. There was a moment when something inside me broke. I became determined to stop putting up with their mistreatment because of the blatant injustice of how they were treated. I dabbed at my soiled shirt and turned to face the room with a steadiness that matched the resolution that was rising within of me. My voice boomed, drawing everyone's attention and cutting off the commotion. I've spoken with an attorney. With a sad heart, I announced. I'm filing for divorce. Lucas. As the room fell silent, with a look of shock on their features, Lucas and his mother looked at me as though they had just encountered an unexpected ghost. I cut her off before my mother-in-law could lose her temper. I said, I'm not finished. In an unyielding tone. I'm challenging the store's merger. There is proof of fraud. And I have already filed the necessary paperwork with the authorities and started the legal process. Lucas. His prior arrogance waning. Stammered with shock. Roberta. You can't be serious. However, I persisted. Disregarding his incredulity. I'm also looking for monetary recompense for everything I've gone through here, I said, maintaining my composure in the face of growing whispers from the visitors. Not waiting for more inquiries or conflict. I pivoted on my heel and went upstairs to gather my things. As she followed me, my mother-in-law's voice became more desperate. Please, Roberta. Let's discuss this. You are exaggerating. I stopped and turned to face her once more. I gave her the lawyer's business card without saying anything. Going forward, all correspondence must go through my attorney, I declared decisively, my determination unwavering. After that, my hands shaking but my resolve unshakable, I withdrew to our chamber. I packed quickly, gathering only the necessities when I got ready to start a new chapter in my life. After years of suffocating, moving out of my mother-in-law's house and into a tiny apartment across town felt like a breath of fresh air. Even though I was by myself now, I wasn't really alone. I felt as though my father's spirit led me, giving me courage when faced with hardship. Together, with the unwavering commitment of my attorney, Mr. Hayes, we fought the illegal merger that my mother-in-law had planned. Our efforts paid off earlier than anticipated. The court overturned the merger and found Mrs. Wilson guilty of fraud, ruling in our favor. They also gave me financial compensation and fined her a significant amount. With this money, I was able to purchase out her ownership of the company, which my father and I had previously run as a combined bakery and tableware store. It seemed strange to be in front of the store again. All ours now, without Mrs. Wilson's specter hanging over us. We succeeded. Dad. We own it once more, I declared as I gave him the new store keys. We immersed ourselves into remodeling the store over the next few weeks, taking it back piece by piece. Every fresh coat of paint and every repositioned display gave me the impression that a piece of my soul had been found. I heard murmurs of Mrs. Wilson and Lucas's difficulties as they went on to new employment, struggling financially from the court cases. But I stayed out of their way. Lucas tried to get in touch with me, but I was determined to close that chapter of my life. Now that we had control over the store, I went back to college and enrolled in night classes, determined to finish my degree. The hope beneath Mrs. Wilson's roof gave way to despair as I sat in a classroom once more. My dad and I shared a pot of coffee at one of the tables one evening after the shop closed. You know, Roberta, starting over like this, it's more than I could have asked for, Dad remarked, his eyes lingering happily over the store. The same sentiments, Dad. It's as though a protracted, horrible dream has finally ended, I said, with a new resolve in my voice. We have another shot here, and I'm not going to waste it. We talked about future goals, like introducing new items, getting ready for the holidays, and sponsoring local events. It was thrilling and energizing, and I enjoyed every second of it. After watching the first story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Next, let's watch another similar story. My life took an unexpected turn when I turned 27. My father unexpectedly passed away, leaving me his whole estate. He had left us years before after deceiving my mother. I was grieving his passing, even though we had not been close. And it was strange to find myself suddenly wealthy overnight. Almost out of nowhere. I received a sizable part in a well-known company, which opened up a world of opportunities. My mother, though, was nervous. She cautioned me one evening as we sat in our small kitchen, "Olivia, be careful. You'll draw opportunists now that you're rich." I dismissed her worries, sure that I could manage any gold diggers that came my way. Then I got to know Mark at the real estate company where I was handling my father's affairs. He was a clerk. Mark's warm grin and genuine charisma were a striking contrast to the busy workplace environment. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said, pointing at my stack of paperwork. I said, "Thankful for the help. I feel like there's so much paperwork." Mark talked at a light pace while assisting me with the forms. "Inheriting a fortune must be quite the adjustment," he said. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in all at once," I answered, becoming more at ease with him. Every time we spoke, the subject area grew beyond law. Our common interests led us to bond over our favorite movies and hangouts on the weekends. It soon became clear that our relationship extended beyond my inheritance. He had an easy charm that made me laugh out loud even when I wasn't expecting it. A few weeks later, he made the bold decision to ask me out to our favorite dive bar for some light cocktails. He smiled and said, "Let's take this conversation outside these boring walls and grab a beer." I agreed without thinking. It felt natural. Our light-hearted outings soon turned serious. And before long, we were talking about our future together. He turned to face me one casual evening over pizza at my apartment and said, "Olivia, I've been thinking. How about we formalize this? Wed me." His suggestion was as uncomplicated and direct as he was. I laughed so hard I almost choked on my slice. Then I said, "Yeah, why not?" We wanted a simple wedding that reflected our personalities, so planning the event was a joy. We came to realize that we both preferred a small, close-knit ceremony with our closest friends and family present. Together, we sketched out our lives and discovered several dreams that we had in common. Mark was frequently making notes about plans on napkins or receipts and was full of ideas. "Olivia, consider this. We could create something remarkable. Something that is exclusively ours," he would exclaim, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Yeah, I love that, building our future together," I would reply, feeling the same thrill all over again. We talked about anything from potential businesses to potential travel spots. Our existence was mapped out in front of us. Dreams and hopes in common. Mark suggested that we use my dad's legacy, the shares I inherited, to launch our business before we got married. Building something together from the ground up felt like the ideal fit. Nonetheless, I felt compelled to speak with Mom before making a final decision. I remember clearly sitting in her old, quaint kitchen to get her thoughts, the one with the fading yellow walls. When I revealed that we were going to utilize the inheritance as startup funding, Mom's look took on a serious tone, which I knew meant she was about to give some wise counsel. "Olivia, you must take care of yourself. Get a prenuptial agreement," she urged, painstakingly blending her coffee. "Ensure that it include provisions pertaining to faithfulness and dedication to the company. One of you will lose their portion if they wander off or bail." I furrowed my brow. A little taken aback. Why bring up cheating? Mom. I have faith in Mark. We shall not turn on one another. I objected. She sighed deeply. Her voice heavy with old hurts. Just because of what your father did to me. Olivia. I'm saying this. It's about exercising caution rather than faith. Her remarks cut deep. And I had to admit, grudgingly, that maybe she might be right. I reluctantly gave in and said, Sorry. Mom. I suppose you're correct. I said, feeling a knot in my gut slowly relax. I brought up the subject with Mark. And at first he seemed surprised. He stopped talking. Thinking about it. A prenup. Really? He finally said. Sounding a little surprised and disappointed. Yes. That's true. My mother just recommended it. It's comparable to having insurance. Not that I think we'll ever need it. I quickly clarified as I watched to see how he would respond. He inhaled deeply and thought for a bit before looking up at me and said, Olivia. I love you. In my world, there is no one more significant than you. I'm on board as long as this gives you a sense of security. Let's approach this your way. His assurance relieved me of some of my worries. And together we worked to set up the prenuptial agreement, making sure its provisions were fair but strict. After that, we decided on a low-key, respectable wedding ceremony, which was exactly what I had imagined. After we sold the shares, we received more money than we had anticipated, which stoked Mark's excitement. Olivia. This is it. His exuberance was infectious as he screamed. We're going to make it big. We put all of our love and energy into starting our company. A medical equipment wholesale warehouse. With our sights fixed on the future. Despite the fact that neither of us had any prior expertise in the industry. Mark's people skills and my aptitude for mathematics worked well together. We'll start small. Grow fast. Keep overheads low. And expand when we can afford it. Mark said in a loud and strategic voice as we looked at possible warehouse locations. That seems like a plan. I said. Excited to start our adventure together. I nodded in agreement. Already imagining the busy warehouse filled with incoming orders and our future coming together. Our wholesale medical equipment business took off more quickly than we had anticipated. Demand was so high that we were suddenly overburdened. It was a fortunate situation. But one nonetheless. Mark. We must hire additional staff. We're the only two of us. And we just can't keep up. I said one night. My voice muffled by the mountains of papers piled on our dining table. Mark scarcely looked up from his laptop. We have a little more time. Olivia. Hiring entails spending. Let's continue. He proposed. I rubbed my temples. Exhausted. Make it through. Mark. Have a look at us. We're exhausting ourselves. This cannot continue. I retorted. His expression met mine. A mix of exhaustion and frustration. All right. Let's investigate. However, we keep it small, perhaps just one or two part-timers. He gave in. Though it was a relief to agree to this. Our growing pains had only begun. New employees meant new duties, including payroll, training, and management duties in which neither of us was an expert. I decided to adjust. So I took a crash course in accounting and business management and set out to successfully negotiate these obstacles. Hey! I came across this accounting online course one night while we were closing up the warehouse. I told Mark I thought it might help with the books. He gave a grateful nod. Olivia. That is fantastic. Clearly relieved. He said. I've been anxious about keeping up with all that. But as our company grew, so did the tension between us. The strain on both of us was too much. And the breaks showed. Mark was out networking and closing sales. And I was stuck in the warehouse doing operations. There was a day when it seemed like we were living different lives. And that sense got stronger. I shouted. Furiously observing your regular excursions. Savoring happy times. While I stay indoors. Sorting out one mess after another. Mark's manner became formal as he conducted business. Are you assuming that this makes me happy? This project is for us. For the health of the company. But now, Mark, it doesn't connect with our shared essence. It feels like we're living different lives. I shot back, sounding strained. After a while, we both calmed down and realized that something needed to change. We decided to schedule monthly meetings so that we could coordinate our efforts, discuss the nuances of every aspect of the company, and renew our personal relationship that went beyond commercial partnerships. Shall we avoid talking about business during dinner? One of our first attempts to rebalance work and life was when Mark said, let it be an intimate moment for us. Free of business discourse. I agreed. Looking forward to things getting back to normal. When we implemented these small changes, we observed a favorable change. The demands of the firm continued. But we were able to handle our individual responsibilities and reduce stress to a somewhat greater extent. Navigating our company's growth trajectory and the resulting strains on our relationship was a learning lesson. As a business grew, more responsibilities were added. I became absorbed in the minutiae of the daily operations, managing everything from customer complaints to inventory control. There was a cost associated with the constant demands and reliance on hurried desk-bound meals. It became difficult to button my once comfortably fitting jeans. And my reflection in the mirror looked almost strange. Not only did I feel physically drained, but I also felt my energy dwindling and that once brilliant spark fading. But Mark was all about making small talk with trading partners, putting an emphasis on networking in order to cultivate connections that would be helpful to our company. But I sensed his disengagement as he immersed himself further in this part of his job description. I became concerned when he started coming home late and giving me evasive justifications. Mark dropped a surprise that left me reeling one evening, right before a big supplier's party. He struck out in our kitchen as I was thinking about forcing myself into yet another baggy outfit. With his eyes locked on his phone, he said, Olivia, you're not going to the party. Intrigued, I insisted on knowing more. His reaction was eerily dispassionate. You don't fit the image they expect, he said firmly, ignoring me as if I were a peripheral problem. My jaw dropped. So? I'm now an embarrassment to you. My hurt and fury were evident in my response. Apathy in his shoulder shrug was more hurtful than any insult. he declared coldly. I'm thinking about the business. Reducing our connection to nothing more than a commercial transaction. I put on a brave front, trying to swallow my emotions. I eventually gave in and said, "Okay. Have fun at your party." He then walked away without saying goodbye, and our home fell into a deafening quiet. Thinking about it made the agony worse. Was this the somber truth of our union? Was Mark no longer concerned with anything other than the company? I waited in the living room, waiting for him to explain in the late hour as he came back. Why did he think it was okay to treat me so disrespectfully? I wanted to know. How was the party? I asked, trying to keep my cool in the face of my inner turmoil. His reply was casual, as if nothing had happened the night before. It was fine. Got some promising leads, he said in a casual manner, completely unaware of the consequences of his actions. That's good, I responded calmly, trying to hide my resentment. Would you say it was worthwhile? Disregarding your wife's feelings. He blamed the customs of commercial negotiations for his evasive response. When I spoke with him about how he had treated our marriage like a business, my resentment was clear. After that horrible party night, he went to bed with an exhausted excuse, and our home was filled with the suffocating fog of his silence, which spoke volumes. As time went on, Mark's critiques of me became more venomous, and our arguments became the norm. He made fun of my style and my decisions, making fun of my looks and insinuating that we were no longer as young as we once were. I tried to ignore their criticisms, but it was clear that something had changed at the core, both outside and within our home. Mark started to avoid me. He claimed he needed space to think, and his withdrawal got so bad that he moved out of our bedroom. He was in a foul mood one night and came home, mockingly discarding my gym membership card. I was thinking you could use one of these occasionally, he spat out, his words dripping with disdain. In my defense, I brought up the needs of the company and my need to unwind after a long day. Even though it was humiliating and hurtful, his attitude was heartless. He implied that my looks were turning off clients and accused me of being lazy. The gulf between us widened as I laid in our empty bed thinking about his scathing remarks. The shards of our broken relationship were further weakened by his increasing frequency of absences and the frequency with which he would not return home. With each passing day, his once cordial manner hardened into an icy coldness, and his answers became increasingly abrupt. It was as if the man with whom I had shared hopes and laughing now looked down on our whole relationship. I cooked dinner on a normal Saturday night, hoping for some normalcy despite the obvious stress. And I longed for a tranquil moment, despite the unsettling silence. I mustered up the confidence to approach it. We have to have a conversation, Mark. When I lowered my fork, I loudly announced, "This isn't sustainable," my voice unfaltering despite the trembling in my palms. His face turned gloomy as he looked up from his plate. His tone was hostile as he snapped, "What are you suggesting?" I tentatively suggested, trying to keep my cool, "That we think about getting a divorce, dividing the firm equally, and going our own ways." Plates clattered as Mark's hand slammed onto the table in an impulsive reaction. Getting a divorce, dividing the company. You're delusional, he said, his anger growing with every word. I worked tirelessly to build this firm by myself. You have no right to even a fraction of it. Leaning forward with an ominous expression. His warning sent shivers down my spine. I'll make sure you don't receive anything. He spat out. His words packed with poison. I was taken aback by his animosity and retreated in terror. My pleading. Mark. Please. Don't do this. Was met with his scornful dismissal and obvious disdain. You're nothing but a burden. A lazy, worthless woman. He snarled. His words delivering the death blow. Leave my house and don't bother me again. I hurried to the restroom to collect myself when his order reverberated through the room, causing tears to well up in my eyes. In the midst of all the mayhem, I saw his phone on the counter. Oblivious to our demise. The screen lit up with a notice. A heartfelt message from a person named Jesse. His birthdate served as the password. And I proceeded to peruse his messages, letting my curiosity triumph over my desire for privacy. What I found was more hurtful than any slight ever was. A trail of personal photographs, rendezvous plans, and love messages exposed his treachery. Reading the note that thanked him for the lavish present he had given her broke my heart. It wasn't just the betrayal. His dishonesty was so blatantly outrageous that it made me sick to my stomach. Something inside of me finally broke. Though, as I continued to go through the texts, I went from being the broken-hearted wife to a woman scorned, driven by a cold, calculated rage. I painstakingly made duplicates of everything, pictures, texts, even vehicle receipts, that could be useful to me in the approaching battle. I carefully put his phone back where he had left it in the restroom. I felt reborn when I emerged from that place, free of the desire to confront Mark or have another breakdown. Instead, I resumed our dinner in solitude, clearing the dishes when I secretly planned my next move. Consumed by his own wrath and hubris, he remained unaware. I was so determined to succeed that the next day I got to our office early. Collecting all evidence before moving forward was my clear purpose. In my quest to expose Mark's fraudulent activities, I began by carefully reviewing the company's financial records and accounts. The document I needed was quickly located: our business expenses, which included the car he bought for his lover. It was so bad that it almost was embezzlement, not just treachery. With a mixture of fear and resolve running through me, I left the office with copies of all the damning documents. I told the lawyer the truth later that morning while we were sitting in his office. I proudly proclaimed, "He's been unfaithful. And I have the evidence to prove it," texts, pictures, even a receipt for the car he bought his mistress. Before releasing the copies I had painstakingly collected, the attorney's face remained expressionless when she combed over the paperwork. This is quite convincing. Together, the prenup and the evidence presented here make for a strong case. He will be taken aback. When the seriousness of the situation became clear, I gave a nod. This isn't just his company. I'd like to keep a stake in it as well. I've put too much effort into this to just let it go, I said, looking for confirmation. In the face of my own doubts, her assurance soothed me. Returning home with legal representation in tow, I confronted Mark, who was blissfully engrossed in his phone in the living room. "We need to talk," I said. my resolve unflappable when I stood at the threshold. Flickering displeasure crossed his features as he peered up. He answered. "What now?" with a clear hint of anger. "Mark. I have seen the texts," I abruptly told him. "I know about Jesse," watching as his face went from irritated to shocked. "What on earth are you talking about?" he muttered, dropping his phone to the table. "Denying it serves no use. I have obtained all the necessary evidence and have sought legal counsel," I maintained, my voice remaining emotionless, with an angry expression on his face. Mark stood up. He objected, saying, "You invaded my privacy by going through my phone." But I stood firm. "Mark. This transcends privacy. You betrayed me, told falsehoods, and even threatened me by asserting. It's over." I ended his attempted intimidation. He shook his head in disapproval and scowled. "You really believe you can unseat me as the company's leader? You cannot exist apart from me," he spat out. "You're incorrect about that." With each word I spoke, my confidence grew, and I boasted that I was more than capable of proving your adultery and so obtaining the business as a result of our prenup. Anger and dismay racked Mark's features, and he became mute. An undertone of "you won't get away with this" emerged from his lips at last. "I have done it before, Mark. I'm on the verge of achieving my goals, and I'm standing firm in my pursuit of justice," I declared, experiencing an unusual blend of joy and despair. I was all set for our court date. Despite Mark's best efforts, the evidence was too strong to dismiss. The judge's decision was so unexpected, as per our prenuptial agreement and the court's order. I was legally granted half of Mark's business. By making this choice, I not only took full control of the business we had founded together, but also of our entire family's wealth. But thinking about the betrayal and mental anguish that Mark had caused me wasn't enough. In addition to granting my petition for monetary compensation, the judge also found unmistakable proof of Mark's adultery and financial malfeasance. Thus she granted my request. As I stepped outside the courthouse, the refreshing wind felt like a new beginning, sweeping away the dust from a victory. The mood had changed noticeably upon returning to the workplace. I was more than simply a co-owner when I stepped through those doors. I was the chief executive officer. With grins on their faces and a mix of wary curiosity and outright fear, the staff cast their eyes above. However, I was overcome with an overwhelming sense of resolve to guide the ship towards the correct course. "Good morning, everyone," I said with a new sense of assurance. "Give it a go. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I will see it through to completion." People were eager for a new beginning, just like me, and the reactions were mixed but generally favorable. Throughout the day, I was deeply involved in planning, meeting with department heads, and presenting the company's new vision. It felt great to be in charge and make choices according to my vision for our future. I was sitting in my office, enjoying the deep shadows made by the sun, when the phone rang late in the afternoon. Mark was the one making the call. The new reality helped me calm the anxious part of me that stiffened up whenever his voice was near. He started to say, "Olivia, I've been thinking," but his voice was unsure. "I messed up. Big time. Could you maybe think about hiring me again for a position at the company? I kept my cool in the face of his daring proposal, which threw me off guard. Mark. After everything, you're really showing your nerve here. Are you seriously under the impression that I would welcome you back into my life and be your companion? I know it's a lot to ask, he said softly. But I'm out of options. Olivia. That seems to be an issue that you're facing. Mark. My company is making progress, not regress. Your bed is ready. Lie in it, I said with conviction. Olivia. Please. He pleaded once more, his voice betraying his increasing desperation. I believe you've made your point. Mark. I interrupted him mid-sentence and hung up the phone before he could finish his sentence. It was freeing to put that chapter behind me and declare my freedom without reservation. Everything moved at a breakneck pace during the following 3 weeks. I renamed the business to emphasize innovation and social responsibility. By funding health initiatives and investing in environmentally friendly technology, we launched initiatives that were near and dear to my heart. Sales were up. Morale was up. And I felt true pride in what I was creating for the first time in a long time. The community and the industry took note. After watching the stories above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.